There are moments in history when a society is forced to confront something it has quietly tolerated for far too long. These moments are rarely comfortable because they do not just challenge actions, they challenge identity, tradition, and the stories we tell ourselves about what is acceptable. Nevada has just created one of those moments by banning horse tripping, a practice that has existed for generations and has been defended with equal persistence. The debate that has followed is not simply about a single event in a rodeo arena. It is about something much deeper. It is about whether tradition alone is enough to justify harm, and whether we are willing to look honestly at practices that have long been shielded from scrutiny. Because when we strip away the language that surrounds horse tripping, when we remove the framing of culture, sport, and heritage, we are left with something far more difficult to defend. We are left with a horse running at full speed, unaware of what is about to happen, and within seconds, that same horse is violently dragged to the ground by its front legs. The impact is immediate and severe. The animal does not slow down before it falls. It does not brace itself. It cannot prepare. Its body is simply taken out from under it, and it crashes into the ground with tremendous force. We believe this practice is extremely cruel, and that belief is not based on exaggeration or misunderstanding. It is based on the simple reality of what the event is designed to do. The fall is not an accident. It is not an unintended consequence. It is objective. The entire structure of the event is built around creating that moment, and that is precisely what makes it so troubling. To understand how something like this became normalized, we have to go back in time, long before rodeo arenas, long before crowds, and long before applause. Like many rodeo practices, horse tripping has roots in practical ranch work, particularly in parts of Mexico and the American Southwest. In those environments, roping techniques were developed out of necessity. Ranchers needed ways to control animals quickly, and horse techniques required timing, coordination, and skill. However, as these working practices transitioned into public events, something fundamental changed. The purpose shifted. What had once been about function became about performance. But to be honest, I don't think they ever should have used this as function anyways. The audience became part of the equation, and with that audience came the need for spectacle. Over time, certain techniques were exaggerated, intensified, and modified to create more dramatic outcomes. Horse tripping emerged from this evolution as one of the most extreme examples of that transformation. Instead of demonstrating control or cooperation, it emphasized force and outcome. The success of the rider was measured not by how well they managed the animal, but by whether they could bring it down. That shift from control to collapse is critical to understanding why the practice is so controversial. In many equestrian disciplines, whether in rodeo or elsewhere, there is at least an element of partnership between horse and human. There is communication, training, and a degree of mutual understanding. Horse tripping removes that entirely. It replaces partnership with domination, and it replaces cooperation with a forced and violent conclusion. The physical consequences of that conclusion are severe and well documented. When a horse is tripped at speed, the forces involved are immense. A horse can weigh over 1,000 pounds, and when that mass is moving forward at speed, the sudden interruption of that motion creates significant impact forces upon the body. Veterinarians have documented injuries ranging from broken legs and torn ligaments to spinal trauma and internal bleeding. In some cases, these injuries are fatal. What makes this even more troubling is that the damage is not always immediately visible. A horse may stand up after the fall, appearing outwardly unharmed, only to suffer complications later. Internal injuries can progress over time, and by the time they are recognized, it may be too late to intervene effectively. Beyond the physical injuries, there is also the psychological impact, which is often overlooked but equally important. Horses are prey animals, and their instincts are built around maintaining balance and the ability to flee from danger. When a horse is suddenly tripped and forced to the ground, it experiences a loss of control that directly contradicts those instincts. This is not simply a physical event for the horse. It is a moment of confusion and fear. The animal does not understand why it has fallen or what has caused it. It only knows that it has lost its footing, and that loss of control can trigger a strong stress response. For some horses, this experience can have lasting effects on their behavior and their sense of safety. For decades, these concerns have been raised by veterinarians, horse owners, and animal welfare advocates. They have documented injuries, presented evidence, and called for change. However, as is often the case with practices tied to tradition, those concerns were frequently met with resistance. Horse tripping was defended as part of cultural heritage, and in many cases, criticism of the practice was interpreted as a lack of respect for that culture. This created a complex and often polarized debate, where discussions about animal welfare became intertwined with issues of identity and tradition. However, history has shown us that tradition is not a fixed concept. It evolves over time, shaped by new knowledge and changing values. There have been many practices throughout history that were once widely accepted and later recognized, when society recognized the harm they caused. The process of reevaluating those practices is rarely easy, but it is often necessary. Nevada's decision to ban horse tripping represents one of those moments of reevaluation. Under the new law, intentionally tripping a horse for sport or entertainment is illegal, and those who organize or participate in such events can face charges under animal cruelty laws. This is not simply a regulatory adjustment, it is a redefinition of the practice itself. By classifying horse tripping as cruelty, the law removes it from the realm of cultural debate and replaces it within a legal framework that prioritizes the welfare of the animal. It sends a clear message that certain forms of harm are no longer acceptable, regardless of how long they have existed. Supporters of the law argue that this is a necessary and overdue step. They point to a growing understanding of animals as sentient beings capable of experiencing pain, fear, and stress. From this perspective, the idea that an animal should be subjected to a violent fall for the sake of entertainment is increasingly difficult to justify. Opponents, however, argue that the law represents an overreach. They contend that it interferes with cultural traditions and fails to fully appreciate the context in which these practices occur. Some argue that not every instance of horse tripping results in injury, and that the practice can be conducted in a controlled manner. This is where the debate becomes particularly difficult because it forces us to confront a fundamental ethical question. Even if harm does not occur every time, does the inherent risk make the practice unacceptable? In the case of horse tripping, the risk is not incidental. It is built into the structure of the event. The fall is the objective, and the fall carries a level of danger that cannot be eliminated. This raises the question of whether it is ethical to continue a practice where harm is not just possible but inherent. From our perspective, the answer to that question is clear. When an activity is designed in a way that places an animal at significant risk of injury for the purpose of entertainment, it becomes extremely difficult to defend. That is why we believe horse tripping is not only controversial but fundamentally cruel. Nevada has now drawn a line, and in doing so, it has joined a broader movement that is reevaluating how animals are used in sport and entertainment. This movement reflects a shift in social values, one that places greater emphasis on empathy, responsibility, and the recognition that animals are not simply tools for human use. Looking forward, it is likely that this issue will continue to evolve. Other states may follow Nevada's lead, and additional practices may come under scrutiny as awareness grows. Conversations about animal welfare are becoming more prominent, and they are influencing not only laws but also cultural expectations. At the same time, it is important to recognize that change will not come without resistance. Traditions are deeply ingrained, and challenges to those traditions can provoke strong reactions. However, history suggests that meaningful change often begins with moments like this, where a single decision prompts a broader reevaluation. Ultimately, the banning of horse tripping in Nevada is about more than one practice. It is about how we define acceptable treatment of animals and whether we are willing to prioritize compassion over spectacle. It is about whether we are prepared to question practices that have long been accepted with scrutiny. For the horse, this law represents a tangible difference. It means that in Nevada, at least the risk of being intentionally tripped for entertainment has been removed. It means that one source of harm has been eliminated, and that is not insignificant. And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all is this. If we now recognize this practice as cruel, then we must acknowledge that it was always cruel. The difference is not in the act itself, but in our willingness to see it for what it is.